Hey guys, my name is David Brear and welcome to Fintech Insider On Air episode 28 now. Last week, Adam and Jeff caught up with the CEO of Habito, Mr. Daniel Hegarty, to talk all about mortgages and everything that kind of came with that. I think Jeff has had some pretty bad experiences on that recently, which was interesting to hear. So if you want to go check that out, head over to the 11FS YouTube or the 11FS Twitter channel and you can catch up on last week's. So this week I'm back in the hosting seat and I'm going to be talking all about Libra, which I personally have almost no context of what it is, but thankfully I have a person who knows all about this stuff, Mr. Simon Taylor.
Hello.
How's it going?
I'm really, really well. Slightly tired, a little bit hungover.
I mean, it was your birthday yesterday, wasn't it?
It was quite fun.
It was.
It may have been the best birthday of my entire life.
The center of my brain still hurts from being out for your birthday last night. So.
Yeah, no, but you did go for the most strong alcoholic beverage they had in the gin category.
You know me, go hard or go home, or at least go home really the pain in the center of the head.
Go home with a headache.
Indeed. I mean, this is something you've been talking about, like literally. Like best birthday ever. You were on BBC News talking about this yesterday, right?
Yeah, it was a weird birthday. I was there at 11:11 on my birthday. Nice. It just felt so on brand somehow. But it's really, really topical because this story has everything. It has technology, it has Facebook post, Cambridge Analytica, it has cryptocurrency, it has scary internet money. It's the kind of thing that you can see politicians get scared at night, and it means something to the public as well.
Nice. All right, well, before we get into that, a few stats before we sort of get into some of the details of like telling me what it actually is. But if we look at some of the stats like we always do, so there's 2.38 billion monthly active users on Facebook, so that is a lot. We're looking at 4.1 billion internet users, so we're seeing over half of the people who are actually using the internet are using Facebook, which is crazy. And these are active users, not just passive people who have an account and not actually accessing it. Retail e-commerce is predicted to get up to 3.5 trillion, and by 2040, 94% of all e-commerce is expected to be done online. So you can kind of see why they're going for this market, given the opportunities that are in there. Yeah. But I guess to sort of maybe kick us off, what actually is Libra then?
Yeah, well, so there's an important distinction here. There's Libra, and then there's the catchily titled Calibra. So I'll start with Calibra, because so imagine Libra is for now, just to picture it as a type of cryptocurrency that exists outside of Facebook. We'll come back to that in a second. Calibra is their wallet. So much like I have WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook Messenger, Facebook, I would have Calibra, and that would allow me to take my dollars, my pounds, my euros, and exchange them for these Libra tokens. Sure. And anybody in theory who has WhatsApp or Messenger or Instagram would have Calibra. It would land on the phone. There, you've got this new wallet, and it looks and feels a bit like Venmo.
So in that wallet, then, can I hold pounds and dollars in the same way as I would hold Libra, or is it just as a means of exchange?
We don't know.
Okay.
I assume they're only going to let you hold Libra. Okay. The idea is you'd have to figure out another way of getting those Libra. Yeah. Don't know. They haven't specified that.
And they haven't specified how you buy them yet?
They've said you can buy them from exchanges,
okay.
But we don't know which exchanges. Are they going to be cryptocurrency exchanges?
Yeah.
They've done a partnership with Vodafone that suggests for emerging markets you might be able to buy them the same way you buy airtime. Who knows? Okay. But what's really interesting about Calibra as a wallet is not only that sort of it's a thing that I will just get because I've got Facebook on my phone, but they're aiming this primarily at the 1.7 billion people who don't already have bank accounts, okay. Of which 1 billion do have access to the internet or a mobile phone. So there's a market there that they're going after. It's sort of like a Swift for everybody else. So that's Calibra. And then Libra is a foundation comprised of some of the world's largest companies. So PayPal, Visa, MasterCard, Stripe, Spotify, eBay, Coinbase, Vodafone. There's a really nice picture of all of this logos.
Just a really small starting group of people to get together, isn't it?
Yeah, but it is some really, really big names. There are some questions as to how deeply involved are all of these companies. So Libra has kind of just got started as a foundation. Now, what is that foundation? Well, it's a not-for-profit foundation based in Geneva. And on their Libra website, what they've done is they've released a whole bunch of kind of bits of information about here's a new way to reinvent money, transform the global economy so everybody can have better lives, and going after those unbanked people. So they've created effectively a different type of blockchain, and their entirely own blockchain. They've created a new type of software, and they've open sourced all of that, put it all out on GitHub. They've released a white paper and gone, we intend to do this thing next year. We're going to launch it in 2020. Here's the testnet version. Come have a look at it and come see what you think. So there's probably about 4 or 5 different bits and pieces to the puzzle. First and foremost, there's the association. Then there's the blockchain. Then there's the ability to build on the blockchain. And then there's how do I get money in and out? So if we take all of those, the Libra blockchain itself, let's not get into the tech too much. It's a blockchain. It's something that lots of people can run, and it's a glorified database.
So, but is this, if they're open sourcing it, is this going to start competing for development time for all other, DLT things that are being kind of exposed? So is this going to start competing with like Hyperledger or something along those lines?
Yeah, so quite possibly. If you look at it, it's inspired by a lot of what's out there. It's got elements of Dfinity, it's got elements of Ethereum, there's little bits of kind of Ripple and Stellar in there. They've taken sort of bits of everything and come up with what is really quite an elegant design for a blockchain. But it is initially permissioned, so it would look more like Hyperledger or Corda than it does Ethereum. Okay. So not anybody can run a node, not anybody can write code and access it. Their intent is that it would become permissionless over time. But we don't know if that's true or not. Yeah. So it may well do.
But does that necessarily give them an advantage, given the amount of people who are essentially validating this, the logo with the circle, validating this as a preference from their perspective? Like, is there any benefit to them of kind of becoming the default that people are kind of developing things on top of?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, if those companies that are on that list of logos like Visa, Stripe, Uber, Spotify, all adopted Libra and all used it as their primary source of payments, like, boom, game over. But there's a question about, have they signed a memorandum of understanding that this is something that's quite interesting and we don't mind our logo being on this? Or do they fully intend to use this thing when it's developed? Sure. We don't know, and I suspect it's probably more towards the MOU side. And indeed, the likes of Visa and MasterCard have even been making noises recently that maybe they didn't really understand quite the depths of what this announcement would mean and some of the backlash from it. But what's interesting here is you've got that blockchain piece, but you do have that association piece, and we've not really seen that before. We've seen Hyperledger, as you say, has a lot of companies around it, around an open source code base, but it doesn't have that open source code base or code bases for one real problem. Libra Association is trying to solve that payments problem. Sure. Ethereum, I can use it to do anything. It's a Swiss Army knife. Yeah. Hyperledger, I can use it to do anything. This is really, really focused. It's interesting though that they've not taken something that's in the market and built upon it for the use case. They built their own technology to then build the use case. So, a lot of this sounds like we're like, but why are Facebook villains? And we'll kind of come to that, whether they're being villainous or whether this is an interesting thing that they're doing for the greater good type thing. But fair play to them. They've actually gone out of their way to invest in building out technology in a space that they had no real right to kind of get involved in, right? Yeah, and you can tell there is a lot of professionals that have done the really sort of hard work on producing a high quality output here. The questions on, is this a well thought through white paper? Is this a well thought through code base? Like, technically, most people that have looked at it have gone, you can punch holes in their choices, but you can't punch holes in their execution. Sure. So it's, from a pure tech standpoint, it's interesting, but I think the optics of it is where it's much more interesting. Like, the names involved alone make this a holy shit moment. Yeah, the names around this are people involved in banking, but not banks, right? Yes. And there are no banks in the foundation, which I think is, with the exception of PayPal, who are a licensed bank in Luxembourg. Yeah. But yeah, that's interesting and stands out on its own. The other thing is they came out and said, this is a cryptocurrency with the word crypto at the beginning of it. For a very big company that's already in the public eye with regulators for post-Cambridge Analytica, can we trust them with our data? Can we trust them more broadly? To use the word cryptocurrency, it's like a politician wakes up one day and has just been dealing with this nightmare about scary clowns, and then suddenly has a nightmare about scary clowns that morph into spiders. It's like you put together my two worst fears. That's vivid. That is very vivid. Yeah. So,
where are they going with it then? Moving through the you said around the technology. What was the next one?
So they've got the technology and the foundation, and then they're trying to move away, I think, from their business model today. So historically, their business model was, I'll take all of your data and I will sell ads based on the data. That has been remarkably profitable for them, but it's also created a whole bunch of challenges. But if you look at their competitors, especially from Asia, but even the likes of Google and Apple, they all have plays in payments. You know, Apple Pay is now widely adopted. I think there's more than 140 million users. A lot of those users are active. WeChat Pay and Alipay are really widely used. And actually, that's a way to make money just off the payments for those organizations. But also, it's a way into banking. If you look at Ant Financial, that's a case study in how using payments can be a beachhead into doing lots of interesting things kind of around that. So it's a new way for them to generate revenue. It's a way towards growth, and maybe it's a way out of the data as the new oil sort of conversation from 10 years ago. So interesting that's, I think, the business model motivation.
Okay, so how does this sort of stand from a regulator's perspective then? So being in a world where, I mean, to your point, some of the people who are involved in this are have licenses of some description, maybe not full banking licenses, but people like Stripe or people like Facebook have e-money licenses.
Yeah.
You know, they are essentially stepping into, because I presume this is a completely separate entity to Facebook. So
Correct.
So they've separated them out.
Well, so remember, there's Libra, the completely separate entity in Geneva, which regulators are like, why Geneva, why not the USA? And then there's Calibra, which is owned by Facebook, which would be regulated by whatever national regulators it needed to be. And Facebook have been vocal about the fact that Calibra, the wallet, would be a fully regulated e-money equivalent, so it would be a money transmitter in the US under the FinCEN guidance. So that bit is fairly clear. But I think the challenge around this separate thing, it's almost created more suspicion than it's solved.
Yeah.
I think the reason they created this separate thing was to say, this is not about us taking all of the data and controlling and owning the world's payments infrastructure. But you can't get away from the fact that if you did have 2.38 billion people adopt a new payments infrastructure, like if that thing falls over, you're in trouble. If that thing has some broken economics, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And it's not just like faster payments going down or Visa going down. This is like 2.38 billion people. That would be huge for the global economy.
And I guess in terms of the impact from to that instance, this bears a striking resemblance to a central bank and multiple banks.
Yeah.
You're in a situation where the people who own the currency and the people who own the markets are separate, and this is essentially what they're kind of replicating just at a global scale.
Yeah.
Which is quite terrifying.
It could be, because if you think about it, if it did go huge, it could in theory threaten central banks' role in the economy. Yeah. Central banks play an important role in terms of managing money supply, to manage inflation, for wage growth, job growth. They've got levers they can pull to try and help manage the economy. If there's this thing that's bigger than them, then do they lose that power? They also have responsibilities in terms of managing the kind of payment systems. If they're looking after, will these things fall over or not, and how do we make sure that everybody plays nice with this currency, and enforcing rules around that currency, would they lose that? Yeah. And then the third thing is, when you look at how Facebook's going to manage this thing called the Libra Reserve. So they're going to hold on to dollars, yen, sterling, euros, and like gold and a whole bunch of stuff, and they're going to put this in the Libra Reserve. And then what they're going to do is say Libras will be backed by all of these things in this reserve, which is fantastic on the surface of it, except when you look at that historically, how they've designed that has a lot of economics flaws. So the central bankers have gone, that looks a lot like it could cause a global financial crisis. And Facebook have gone, oh, well, that's why we want to talk to you. And to Facebook's credit, they've come out and said, we don't have all the answers. But Mark Carney, a couple of weeks ago, the governor of the Bank of England, said, well, you can't do half a job with this stuff. Like, doing half a job with a payment system for 2.38 billion people just won't cut it. So we've got to get this right long before you push this thing live, and maybe next year's a little bit aggressive.
I mean, is that a physical reserve that they're actually talking about creating, as in like from a physical asset perspective in terms of holding those things, or is it literally are they literally going to be holding gold in this reserve?
Well, so that's the question.
Okay.
Will they be holding central bank money? Will they be holding deposits at a commercial bank? So what's the risk on those commercial banks? So nobody knows. They haven't given us that detail, and so the banker nerds out there have been furiously sort of trying to figure out, well, how would that work? And there are some really good diagrams online of how people have sort of figured out how the whole system might work. And our good friend Colin G. Platt from Blockchain Insider actually did a blog post on his Medium account of comparing the global financial crisis to the Libra Reserve and all of the things you can look to learn and how it could go
how
horribly.
not to do it next. Yeah.
Yes.
So I mean, central banks should be or could be scared of this.
Yeah.
General banks could be scared of this.
Yes.
How have people reacted?
Well, I think the politicians have reacted probably the most strongly because, like I said, scary clown meets spider. Facebook already has a pretty bad rep with governments. Yeah. They were already, in the eyes of not just misinformation, disinformation, but especially in a US context, the Democrats are really annoyed over the potential sort of disinformation that may or may not have led to hacking, may or may not have led to election interference. So there was that. And then the other side of it is crypto is the home of potentially, wonderful things, but also some very nasty things. Human trafficking, things like ransomware, things like, again, state-sponsored espionage and hacking. And again, the biggest loser in that conversation in the last 5 years has been the Democratic Party in the US. So they are really sort of pushing against crypto. But to be fair, so are the Republicans, and the US has been really banging the drum. I would have said crypto was one of the top two or three issues at the global financial services kind of regulator level already before Facebook came along. And then this comes along and kaboomy.
Yeah.
It's just suddenly gone to number zero.
And is that even more of a problem? Because essentially while these things have been in many instances, companies that nobody's ever heard of, people have been worried about it, but maybe not actively doing something about it. Whereas now it's like the thing your mum uses to send you a picture. So like, actually have we moved into like either this is going to legitimize it for the greater good, or it's going to turn it into a problem that actually global government organizations really need to kind of step in and do something about?
What's interesting is global governments could potentially shut down Libra, but they couldn't shut down things like Bitcoin. Yeah. In fact, there are rumors that the US government did try to shut down Bitcoin. The whole point of it is that nobody can shut it down, which is precisely what makes it so scary and dangerous. But with things that you can't shut down, there are still ways that you can control them, you can contain them. And actually, that's a lot of the effort that's underway now. But yeah, I mean, you could imagine that if this thing did take off as well, not just would you have that increased risk of things going wrong, but what does it mean for central banks if I could hold my money in Libra, or I could hold my money in my bank? I'm not really getting any interest from my bank either way, so why wouldn't I just hold it in Libra? And by the way, I can move it between my friends super easy. Everybody's got a Libra account. So would we see deposit flights from banks to that? And if the economics of Libra are broken and deposits fly from banks, would the banks themselves then be really exposed?
Yeah.
So there's some really serious questions for the banks as well.
I'm not going to start getting taxi men trying to tell me some hot tip again, am I? Like I had for like a year when Bitcoin was going crazy.
No, weirdly, around Libra we have seen some price action in Bitcoin and the altcoins, but it's been sort of up and down and up and down. And that price action hasn't been driven by volume. In other words, you've not had like 2-3 years ago where you just had the consumer just running at this stuff. Yeah. This has been much more sort of tempered price movements, and people are changing the price that they're willing to pay for something, but you're not seeing the volume.
So we'll come to whether like this is Facebook being evil or good in a second, but I mean, how are they going to handle that? Because the volatility in the market is usually the thing that kills currency. So how are Facebook, has Mark Zuckerberg kind of come out and given any comment of why they're doing it, how they expect to control the fluctuations or anything yet? Or is it just like here's a white paper, we'll give you more information later down the line?
Precisely, there's a white paper and that describes the Libra Reserve, which I mentioned. The Libra Reserve is designed to back the Libra coins with this reserve. So in theory, those Libra coins would be stable because you've got all of this reserve sitting behind it and from this basket of currencies and goods and assets. But that Libra coin would move against the dollar, it would move against the pound, so it has its own value, and this reserve should keep it steady.
Stable. Yeah.
But the way they've designed that reserve is the kind of thing where central bankers have gone, well, yeah, that makes sense on like at 30,000 feet, but when you scratch beneath the surface, you're like, oh, this could really go wrong if it's scaled.
Yeah.
Like, so there's this concept in crypto land of stable coins, the idea that if I have a bunch of dollars sitting somewhere and I give you that can and say that's worth $1, you can redeem that can for $1 anytime you like, one-to-one backing. But with a reserve, it's a little bit different and it's a little bit more complicated. So that's what they're saying they will keep it stable with. And if it works, it would be phenomenal, but there's so much more homework that would need to be done before you could get there.
Yeah, I mean, asset-backed reserves by nature will rely a lot on the asset in its first place, right? So it's an interesting market to kind of step into. I mean, why are they doing this? Like, Facebook are a social media platform, you know, GIFs around the internet, like speaking to my mum, you know, like why is the people who started doing photo sharing back in a university now, you know, trying to create a global currency?
So interestingly, if you look at David Marcus's background, he's the guy that's leading Libra for Facebook. He was leading payments at Messenger and Messenger itself. And before that, he was the CEO of PayPal. Before that, he was the CEO of Zong, I believe, or Boku. It was one of those two companies that PayPal acquired who did emerging markets SMS-based payments. Right. So his track record has been payments for quite some time. So I think he's been brought in with a mandate figuring out what payments look like for Facebook, and he does seem to have that mandate. So there's that side of like they've been wanting to do payments for quite some time. I think the other side is they probably couldn't win at payments in developed markets in the way that they could in developing markets. If I was to articulate their position, it's basically there's a whole bunch of people who aren't using the internet that could be, so it's mission aligned. They want to lift people into financial inclusion, you know, make the world a better place, Silicon Valley, Hooli references, all of that kind of good stuff. But I think secondly, if they were doing that, they'd create economic activity, and if they can see that economic activity in their Calibra wallets, they can start lending to those people. Sure. And if they're lending to those people, they've got a new revenue line. And if they've got a new revenue line, maybe they don't rely on advertising as much. Or because of that new revenue line, they can actually start to identify where their ads are being effective. And I think this has been the dream for quite some time, going from advert to payment, and then closing that loop and going back round. It's like, this advert resulted in this payment, and actually I think there's something there that they've been trying to get at for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the idea of taking sort of banking into places where banking hasn't been, you know, banking in its broadest concept of payments and being able to make payments for things, you know, like obviously things that have happened with the places in Africa with like M-Pesa, but they're going global, like it. From the stuff that they've kind of put out, have they been very specific that they're looking at developing markets, that they're, you know, this is banking the unbanked?
Yes, that's absolutely the message of Libra and the message of Calibra. But if you look at some of the companies, it's a bit all over the place. They've got this mix of crypto companies, this mix of big techs from the West, and then one or two sort of organizations like Mercy Corps, Women's World Banking, and Kiva, who do things like micro-lending in emerging markets. So it's kind of, yes, all the messaging's about emerging markets, but all the optics are about developed economies. So it's hard it does look like they're West Coast tech buddies and a few people they managed to get hold of in emerging markets. The interesting one there is probably Vodafone, who are probably the best place to do something along those lines.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, as in mobile wallets, people like Vodafone makes a lot of sense. But when you start getting into places like Uber, like, I mean, PayU makes a lot of sense, developing market stuff. PayPal are trying to do more and more into that space, aren't they? But
if you were to talk to an Uber, like their biggest pain, Spotify's biggest pain is Visa and MasterCard fees. Like and also the pain of like the lack of data and about your users that you get through that. Like that's a real frustration. So I can imagine for them, this sort of different type of payment network that was more, you know, where they understood the source code would be hugely compelling to a technology company that they could deeply integrate to their systems without relying on that network. But it's interesting then that Visa and MasterCard are in there.
But I guess a lot of this, you know, the eBays, the Stripes, that kind of leans itself towards SMEs to a certain degree as well, doesn't it? In terms of, not just about making payments, but like creating commerce, which I actually think, that's quite interesting, isn't it? In a developing market, people being able to buy and sell goods, not and actually the emphasis with Stripe and eBay on the sell side of things as well. But I mean, like, why are no banks in this?
If you just need to look at the regulatory response, I think
Do you think they would have been consulted and talked to, or do you think it's we need to get so far down the line and then we'll actually start pulling people in a little
So
bit?
there was an article I saw, I think it was in Finextra, where RBS actually confirmed they had met with and talked to Facebook and Libra, and they were sort of saying that we've got an open mind, and it reminded me of the comments from Mark Carney, open mind but not an open door. I think there's a lot of people that at least want to know what's going on here. If you're at a bank and Facebook want to come talk to you, it's like, what are you actually doing? So that they're at least informed. So I wouldn't be surprised if Facebook had a lot more conversations along those lines, but also that the bank's compliance teams have gone, we don't have to push go on this anytime soon. Our business is still making money. There's a risk if we push go on this that we get hit by the regulator really, really hard. And the regulatory backlash has been, and the political backlash has been phenomenal. You have Trump coming out against cryptocurrencies and name-checking Libra. You have the US Secretary to the Treasury, Stephen Mnuchin, saying what Facebook's done and what cryptocurrency is doing is causing all kinds of anti-money laundering, terrorist financing risk. We need to be really careful. These things can't go unchecked. This is you've got David Marcus being hauled up in front of the US Senate. That's a pretty strong and swift response. And some of the initial reactions when this news broke from US policy and regulators and politicians was just like, what is this? And some of the Europeans on the privacy side as well. So Facebook have said, we won't use Calibra to capture data about you so that we can sell ads. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute. You said the same thing about WhatsApp. You, in fact, testified in front of Congress that you wouldn't use WhatsApp data to target ads. You now use WhatsApp data to target ads. So they've got a bit of a credibility issue.
Sure. So, I mean, how do governments actually respond to this? This is pretty much a different language to them in terms of what they understand. We saw Zuckerberg get pulled in front of Congress, and it was comical, the level of conversation that was, or the level of questions that were being posted to him. Like, in a regulatory environment where people are not so au fait with the technology or actually the implications of it, how do you regulate something you don't understand?
I think that's I think that's the nub of the issue. Like, can Congress be expected to understand this well enough to regulate it? The famous one, well, not regulate it, but kind of hold it to account. So and
globally as well. From a US perspective, they've got much more of a black and white. You can, you can't. Here we've got a kind of a do no harm type. So actually, it's probably going to be easier for somebody like the Bank of England and the FCA because they can wait. In the US, they've actually got to take a position, which is actually probably a lot more difficult, isn't it?
Yes and no. I think also in the UK, you've got Mark Zuckerberg, who didn't turn up to the House of Parliament after an invite to do so. So like
that's a long way, though. Come on, right? Silicon Valley to here.
So I think there's a lot of political upset, and actually, if you remember when Zuckerberg went to the US Senate, one of the senators asks, Mr. Zuckerberg, how do you make money? And Zuckerberg said, Senator, we sell ads. Like, is that the outcome here? Or are we actually going to see the House Committee on Financial Services start to ask really probing questions? And you've got to bet that the banks and the incumbents are working with their lobbying organizations to ensure that every possible reason why Libra has to die is being articulated in some of those conversations. And actually, a lot of those are how do you regulate it? The fear is, and I think the risk is, we just go, oh, well, what you need is to get everybody's identity. You need to KYC everybody on the Libra network. And it's like, well, that would work if we were in the world of banking and financial services. But if you'd KYC'd everybody on the Libra network and Facebook had done it, well, now I've just got this public database of identities and I've got a massive privacy issue. So the thing you were trying to fix, which is Facebook having a privacy problem, you've just broken by enforcing the existing rules you had upon them. So this is a complicated one. I don't think it's easy. And I think the US government's reaction is, you will follow the existing rules. And I don't think that's the right answer in this case. I think this one is really going to take a lot of thinking through, figuring out. Actually, I think the biggest question, though, underneath all of this is we're assuming Libra will happen. The hardest part is going to be executing this. They've released a white paper and some test code that has some holes in it. Yes, from a technology standpoint, it's not bad, but from an economic standpoint, massive holes. Can they execute this? Can they get this live? And would anybody use it? Are the far bigger questions. And would regulators even let them, or would the feds, would you have SWAT teams at the doors trying to seize computers? Or
highly likely, I imagine. Yeah. So, I mean, what happens next? So, like I said, they put this white paper out. Yeah. They've said they're going to do it in 2020.
Yeah, apparently that was when it was going to go live. I suspect what will happen is Libra, as designed, will change dramatically in the next 3 to 6 months. Facebook will be out there, sort of as they have been, sort of trying to deal with queries and concerns. And I imagine they're going through a massive learning period right now, where all of this insight is coming into them now. They've sort of broken cover. There were rumors that this was happening for 6 to 12 months before it happened. But now suddenly all of the brains in the world are looking at it, tearing it apart, finding things wrong with it. That just must be an absolute avalanche of information. And maybe they're finding a way through it whereby actually this isn't going to end up looking like Libra, it's going to end up looking like something else. Yeah. And that something else is like the compromise position that maybe they always had in mind.
How many people do you reckon, like Libra is clearly, this isn't one dude. Like, how many people do you think is kind of working on this? Like, is it for them, purely just from a logistical perspective, for them to have enough people working on this to have thought it through to a good enough degree where some people are picking holes in various different things, but to have recruited that amount of talents to work on this for a period of time in silence is pretty impressive, right?
Yeah, so they acquired a team that came out of, I think it was University College London or Imperial College London, that was about 5 or 6 people, but they've also been actively hiring, and they also reassigned a lot of their payments team internally under David Marcus. So there are rumors from different journals that it's anywhere between 100 and 200 people. That feels about right, sort of finger in the air, but I really don't know.
So do you think this is sort of game on again? Do you think this is kind of the market's going to simmer up again? We're going to see more sort of active markets back into the cryptocurrency space, or while the holding pattern of what Libra actually is going to be? Or do you think this is just this is very interesting. It's going to be a lot of discussion for the next year or so, and then we'll see what happens.
I think this has forced the hand of global governments, and one of two things will happen. They'll either successfully kill it, or they'll make it so strong they can never kill it. And that's going to be a heck of a movie to watch play out.
Well, on that note, that sounds like a good place to probably leave it. All right, guys, that's all we have time for this week. If you have, probably like a million questions for Simon on that at that point, then, Simon, where can they get you on Twitter?
At SY Taylor on Twitter, and you can find out more. We did a couple of episodes on Blockchain Insider, so that's available on your favorite podcast client. Just look for Blockchain Insider.
I think this one's going to run and run and run and run and run and run and run. You can find me over on Twitter at David Brear. Thanks so much for tuning in this week. We've got another one of these coming out next week, so come back again this time next week. See you later.